Good afternoon, everyone. This is Chris Scully coming to you from Drive, and today I have with me Cassey Croel, and we're going to be talking about how to increase your profits. Not just the workshop that Cassey will be delivering, but we'll also talk about some things that you can do pretty quickly to help you increase the profits at your shop. So, welcome, Cassey.
Thank you.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about profits and what goes into running a profitable shop, and how that relates to the topic of the workshop you'll be teaching, which is very largely about KPIs. So how do KPIs help a shop owner make their shop more profitable?
Well, to start with, how to create a profitable shop is a loaded question. But overall, a well-managed shop will create a profitable shop. And KPIs help you determine what is going on in your shop at any given point in time, whether that be weekly, monthly, and also it allows you to compare different periods of time. So month to month, year to year, week to week. And from there, at Drive, we're able to figure out or determine kind of what's the source of an issue. Or maybe it's a combination of sources. And to give an example, because I know that probably sounds pretty complicated, I had a shop to where, they came into the program saying, I want my gross profit to increase. So I said, okay, let's start with your KPIs and see what's going on. So within a month, we were able to identify that cost of parts were out of line based on industry standards. But more importantly, we were able to determine whether or not it was mismanagement or lack of management of parts, or the service advisor not creating a profitable estimate. Now that's key, because you could kind of be, like chasing your tail, trying to figure out, why is this out of line? You could be looking at every repair order. But through the KPIs, we were basically able to determine it was one of the two. And that's a short investigation. Just having a conversation with the service advisor or looking to see if your parts are being returned.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about then how do you do that? What is the basic concept behind managing by numbers and narrowing down the target like that?
Okay, again, loaded, Chris. Well, managing by numbers, we're looking at every aspect of the shop, and it's based on our timeline. Well, timeline, but kind of our timeline. And it starts with marketing, and then it moves into sales, and then it moves into service, production, and then profit income. Mm-hmm. So I can look on that timeline and see where the KPIs are. So if I'm looking at sales and I'm seeing that there's a low average repair order, then I'm thinking, is this a marketing issue? Or could it be what comes after, a service issue, where in our case, we really believe in inspections. Inspections aren't being done.
Okay. So let's talk about some of the KPIs that a shop would need to track in order to be able to do that kind of a analysis of the shop. Obviously, we don't have time to talk about all of them, but some of the key ones.
All right, well, I'll give you two from each category. For marketing, I would say leads is number one. I would also say promotions out. For sales, average repair order, completed repair orders. For service production, build hours, tech efficiency. And for profit income, gross sales and gross income.
Okay. Now, you mentioned lead. So what's a lead?
Oh, okay. So this is big topic. Leads can be anything. It could be someone calling in. It could be someone walking in. It could be someone who made an appointment through your website. It could be someone who contacted you through Facebook. Anything that could result in a repair order is a lead.
Okay, great. Now, I know that most shop owners aren't used to dealing with numbers, aren't used to tracking this kind of thing. Um, how can we make it, how can we simplify it or make it more, what's the word I'm looking for? Uh, Palatable to somebody who's never done it before?
Well, I start with the basic KPIs. And actually, I start with your expenses. And what we at Drive call is your owner's break even. So it's the expenses in order to pay all the bills, including your payroll and your parts, keep the lights on, the whole bit. And then what we firmly believe in is 20% to the owner.
Okay.
But with that said, that's kind of my guiding force. So that goes into the KPI. So then if that's the case, then we need to make sure gross sales meets that.
All right. So if let's say a shop needs to make, I don't know, let's say $20,000 a month to cover all of its expenses, then obviously to make profit, you got to produce more than that. And one of the things that I saw for years is business owners who didn't even know what that number was. So this is not a small step for a lot of business owners, being able to actually know with some certainty that, all right, if I make this amount of money, then I'm making a profit. Many of them were shooting in the dark without even knowing what they were aiming for. So this is a big deal, and this is one of the things that I think is one of the biggest factors in success as far as making your shop more profitable. Is you got to know what the number is. You've got to know what you're aiming for in order to be able to get there.
It's definitely, oh, you go.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, it's definitely a guiding light. But one thing that we talked about a bit ago was costs. Was my first example. And so, although the gross sales were doing well with this shop, he still wasn't getting the gross profit percentage he's looking for. And I get the bottom line is really at the end of the day for a lot of shop owners. So we do look at, and there's a few other KPIs we add, right? Nothing too overwhelming. But the basics, enough for us to see if there's enough money left for overhead and for take home for the owner.
Okay. Now, you know what it is you're trying to get to, but let's say a shop isn't hitting that number. Maybe they're falling short consistently over a period of time. What would be one of the things that you would suggest that they look at in order to start to fix that situation, given some of the KPIs that you mentioned earlier?
Well, if sales are not above expenses, I do look at sales first. I do suggest looking at sales first. So completed repair orders, average repair order, especially, you've done a lot of work to get vehicles in. So what can be done to increase what could be while they're there? So the average repair order, whether that's inspections or your service advisor's ability to sell. So after that, if it's not sales, and if it's maybe a production issue with inspections and there's not enough for the service advisor to present to the customer, then that would be my next step.
Okay, great. And you mentioned the pipeline earlier and how that worked a little bit. Would you look at marketing as a potential reason why a shop might not be making any money then?
Right. Like, we had said before that it could be, the first step of the pipeline, or it could be, right after. So yes, marketing would be another place to look to see if you're doing enough promotions, if you're doing enough marketing. Your website, Google Ads is necessary, grassroots marketing, anything to bring more visibility.
Great. And so let's talk a little bit about the workshop itself and what it covers and what somebody might expect to get out of it if they were to attend the workshop. Over to you. Just kind of roll with it. Whatever. What would you say to somebody about that?
Well, I think it's going to be different for every shop. But I would say overall, you would look at whatever your bottom line concern is, and then we would determine which KPIs to focus on in order to achieve or resolve it.
All right. And what are some of the takeaways that you've seen shops come out of the How to Increase Your Profits workshop with? I know you've delivered it a number of times. There's probably a couple that sort of stand out as far as what clients have gotten out of that workshop.
I think understanding industry standards as far as where their cost of parts should be, their direct labor, their direct cost versus their gross profit. That was an eye opener for some people, but also action plans, using the KPIs as a tool, putting them in on Monday mornings or Friday evenings at the end of the week, or Saturdays if your weekends then, and then putting an action plan for the next week. So really seeing that those KPIs give you targets to solve problems. Or you know what, here's the great thing about this. There could be things you're doing really well. So let's do more of those and identifying them and make sure that we do. Okay. And well, the big thing I harp on is that, it's not only identifying them, but it's setting kind of dates and times to get them done by. Mm-hmm. So there could be targets you set that, end up doing by the end of the month or 2 weeks from that date, but it gives you a guideline. And I don't think that most shop owners realize they need that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And actually the point that you just made about the shop doing well or having things that are going well and isolating what is bringing about those results is very important. In this industry in particular, the shops are used to fixing things that are broken. And what we're talking about here is something that's not only not broken, but it's actually performing very well. And one of the ways that you can mess that up is by not analyzing what is causing that shop or that part of the shop to perform better, so that you can make sure that you don't drop those actions. Mm-hmm. And I know that you cover that in the workshop, and let's talk about a little bit how to tie that into an action plan, because that's something that I think people should understand a little bit.
Well, let's say your average repair order is increasing. Then I'm going to look at what were the best practices I did that week. And that's why some people say, why do I have to look at this weekly? Why do I have to enter them weekly? It's because you'd be amazed what you may do one week, you don't do another. And you just don't realize it because you're in it. So I would definitely say that, anything that you see that's going well in your KPIs, give it some thought and think, okay, let's do that again and see if it keeps working. And then I'll look at that, a snapshot of that the next week. Same with marketing. I did a promotion. It seems like I had a lot of people who came in. All right, let me keep doing it. Let me track, new customers and see how many are coming in from week to week. And maybe I want to continue doing that promotion.
Now that's a really good one. In fact, you see a lot of times people will change up promotional action just because maybe they're tired of it without taking a look at what kind of results they're getting from it. And it's not about whether you're tired of it or not. It's about what your KPIs say. Are you getting results from that marketing piece or that marketing action, whatever it might be, or aren't you?
That's exactly it. And I don't think they stop to think about it. And these are very basic. So when you had asked earlier, how do you make it more palatable? Well, as you go through the workshop, a lot of shop owners see, okay, this is pretty basic. And not to say that they are just like, don't get it, but you just don't think to do it. So once you get through the workshop, you think there's a lot of things I can easily wrap my head around. Now I just have to, go through taking the time to put them in place. And then we talk about making a routine.
Yeah, that's such an important part of managing by the numbers, is doing it consistently. Every week, week in, week out, without fail, same time every week, you sit down, you look at your numbers, you do your weekly action plan, and you then got to get those steps done. It's great to write a plan, but you still got to actually implement it in the real world. Now, I know that you get shops at various stages who take this workshop. Is it any different in terms of managing by KPIs for a small shop versus a large shop, a general repair shop versus, say, a collision shop?
The basics are all the same. It's all the same needs. Maybe there'll be different KPIs, more of one than another in each particular area, but it's the same concept. Matter of fact, the shops that are doing really well, they actually need to manage by KPIs even more so, with more employees, with more gross sales or gross income, with more work, there's more costs. So if you don't manage them and properly make sure that you're within industry gauges, then you could be just as at a loss as a smaller shop.
That's a great point. And when it comes to figuring out where to start, or what you should focus on, is there like a rule of thumb or something that you could tell our audience that they could start with? Obviously, they should do the workshop, and I'm not saying that I want you to give away the whole workshop in the next couple of minutes, because that would be impossible anyway. But what would be an important rule of thumb when it comes to managing by KPIs?
First of all, enter them. Second of all, or maybe this is before, first of all, is gather the information and make sure you're gathering the right data. And if you have questions about what that data is, obviously for Drive clients, ask your coach, but just in general, if you feel like, where would I find this? Call your shop management customer service. Have your employees get involved, even if you have to do it manually on paper and you can't pull a report. Then get those KPIs in there. Even if you have marketing services, they have dashboards. Look at the dashboards. Keep on top of, the different areas that we've talked about.
All right. And is that something that happens fairly commonly? People can't get the numbers out of their shop management system or don't know how to do it?
More commonly than you thought, or they'll just go with the basics that they felt was always important, whether it's just gross sales or whether it's just billed hours. And that's always what's worked for them. So that's all they know.
Okay.
And yeah, it's really not as hard as they may seem. It's just really a matter of making a phone call.
All right, great. And I know one of the things I always used to tell people when it comes to managing by KPIs is that you just have to do it, and you have to be consistent about it. Delaying it to get things all perfect or whatever doesn't actually work. And what have you found in terms of, and this is, I think, a question more about before and after, like you have a client that's maybe not quite so good at handling their KPIs or not quite so consistent before they do the workshop. And then after they do the workshop, how does that usually change, or does it change?
I have found that most participants become consistent about entering KPIs, but it goes a step further.
Mm-hmm.
Then it becomes analyzing and asking questions about the analysis, and also taking action. And then realizing the weeks they don't do it, wow, I'm probably really missing out here. Instead of, saying, no, I didn't really need it. It's like, okay, maybe I didn't do it, but I know it would have made a difference, which is kind of half the battle.
Okay, great. And for clients that are out there, or shop owners who aren't clients of Drive, who are struggling with managing their shop and getting on top of things, how does this workshop help them to do that?
Well, like I was saying, this really is a snapshot as to what's going on in their shop. It'll teach them what it is that they're analyzing, why it's important, how it relates, how it helps them every day. And then it shows them how to create an action plan, how this relates in even managing their employees, seeing if performance is dropping, and then what to do. So
Great.
if you're, yeah.
And were you going to say something else there? Sorry, did I cut you off?
Go for it.
Oh,
No,
okay.
go ahead. As you can see, I could talk about this all day.
Yeah, no, I understand. Been there. So with regard to a shop owner who maybe isn't sure whether or not this is a good workshop for them to do, I know what I would say, which is definitely it is, and you should do it. But since you're instructing it, what would you say as to why is it that somebody should do this workshop?
It is one of the most important workshops you're going to take. There's different cornerstones in a shop, and this is one of them. And it is to me, the primary way to manage your shop, to kind of lead your shop in a direction, not just manage and keep it afloat, but kind of direct it into a direction. And I think you were saying, well, you did ask me earlier, for a struggling shop, what's the biggest thing? And
Mhm.
that's making your owners break even in the beginning. And, following or entering your KPIs, tracking them is the best way to do that.
Absolutely. And that I think it kind of puts a point on the fact that if you're not managing your shop by numbers and you're not gathering the information about what's actually going on, and you're not analyzing it and taking action, then you're mostly just shooting in the dark. I've made this analogy to people in the past, and I think it's still appropriate, where if you're doing anything other than managing by your KPIs, you're guessing, and you're taking really rather uneducated guesses because you don't have the information at your fingertips to be able to make an educated guess as to what needs to be done to improve your shop. So for everybody out there who's not done this workshop, you need to do it. It will help you. Cassey, what would you say is a simple way to describe what somebody should look for, or it's not the right word, should get out of doing this workshop?
Well, managing your shop by KPIs, creating action plans, taking control of what's happening to your shop. I think a lot of shop owners come to us saying, I don't know what's going on. I need help to figure this out. Maybe I'm not a business person. And this is a way to wrap your arms around what's happening in your shop and to your employees.
That's an awesome way to put it. The KPIs actually, and my experience is that they actually do exactly that. When you manage by KPIs, it gives you control of your shop. You can take control of every aspect of your shop if you have KPIs that you're collecting, you're looking at, you're analyzing, and you're taking action to improve them on a consistent basis. That's a great way to put it, Cassey. I think that a lot of shop owners, if you feel like your shop is controlling you, if you're not in control of your shop, then you need to do this workshop, and you need to learn how to manage your shop by KPIs and do it effectively. Because when you do manage by the numbers, you have complete control over any aspect of your shop, because you can see it. The numbers tell you what needs to be done. You can write out an action plan to get to handle whatever the cause of what you see in the numbers is. And if you then actually execute that action plan, the numbers change, they improve. Mm-hmm. And that's control. That's what I think most every business owner that I've ever talked to wants in their business. So there you go, everybody. That's the reason you should do this workshop, how to increase your profits. And unfortunately, that puts us almost at time. It's amazing how fast this time period goes. Next week, we have guests John and Sandy Calagiro of Inland Truck and Trailer joining us. And thank you, Cassey, for coming on and talking about the How to Increase Your Profits workshop. And everybody have a great weekend.
Thank you.